Today I want to share with you some very exciting results showing that sunlight exposure to our skin and to our eyes promotes testosterone increases, mating behavior, and aggression. This is a paper just published in Cell Reports. The major takeaways of the paper also include that skin is acting as an endocrine organ, meaning it is making hormones or influencing the secretion of hormones elsewhere in the body. I'll give some of the details in a moment, but basically what the study shows is that exposure to sunlight on skin, and in particular UV light, ultraviolet light in the blue wavelengths, so short wavelength blue light, activates a molecular pathway in the skin that then signals to the brain, namely the pituitary and the hypothalamus, and then onto the gonads, the ovaries in women and the testes in males, to secrete testosterone and to promote certain types of mating behavior and aggression. Now, how does all this work? Well, first the background. Previously, it's been shown in robust studies that men prefer the scent and the appearance of faces of women that are in their pre-ovulatory phase of their menstrual cycle. So these studies essentially include giving men a bunch of different smells of the sweat or skin of women that are in different phases of their ovulatory cycle or menstrual cycle. And right before ovulation, there's something in the scent of the sweat and or skin of women that men find more attractive than the scent and skin smell of women that are at a different phase of their ovulatory cycle. Very interestingly, that effect is eliminated by oral contraception. In other words, if women are taking birth control to limit ovulation, then men no longer show that preference of their particular skin or sweat smell. If you want to look up those studies, that's Roberts et al. 2004, and I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing this, but Kustav-Yarkru et al. 2004. How is all this working is the question of the present study just completed. What they did is they exposed mice or humans to sunlight, and it does appear to be sunlight exposure on the skin. They had people spend a fair number of hours outdoors, up to 4 hours outdoors. And with the mice, they had them exposed to UVB light, or this ultraviolet blue light. They identified a molecular pathway involving a tumor suppressor gene called p53. p53 has lots of different effects in different cells of the body. It can influence a lot of different gene expression and protein expressions in different cell types and areas of the body. But basically what they showed is that when the skin is exposed to sunlight, which contains this UVB light, p53 is activated in a skin cell type called the keratinocyte. And that showed, or I should say caused, downstream activation of 6 genes that influence the pituitary, this endocrine organ, and the hypothalamus. So it was essentially causing the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone from the pituitary, which then go and act on the gonads, the ovaries and the testes. Now, that caused things like follicle maturation. So the egg needs to mature. It matures, and it's more prone to maturation and ovulation in the presence of this sunlight pathway that converges on these different brain centers and causes increases in particular hormones. And it increased mating behavior in both male and female mice. And in humans, it was found that testosterone increases in both men and women who are getting a lot of sunlight onto their skin. And I mention eyes as well because in the study, they didn't rule out the possibility that some of that effect is due to the eyes viewing sunlight. So it's probably both, given what we know about these biological pathways. Also very interesting, they looked at testosterone levels across the entire year, different months ranging from January to December of people living in the northern hemisphere, and found that testosterone levels, mating behavior, aggressiveness, and so on were highest in the months of July, August, and September, which is consistent with all the other findings. And all of this makes sense given what we know about the seasonal breeding of other types of animals which restrict their breeding and aggressiveness, etc., to particular months of the solar calendar. Turns out humans are also experiencing some of these effects. Also really interesting is that the skin is not just an organ for protecting the organs of our body that are internal, but is also an endocrine organ. It is a gland of sorts. And therefore the results about the smell of skin and the smell of sweat being more interesting or exciting or preferable at certain phases of the ovulatory cycle and so on perhaps should not surprise us.